Have you ever been so blindsided by the people you trusted most that it felt like the floor was ripped out from under you? That was me, the good daughter, the one who showed up for every holiday, cared for aging parents, and sacrificed more than I'll ever admit. Only to find out, when the will was read, that I was left with nothing. Not a cent, not a keepsake, not even a thank you. But here's the thing. They didn't just cut me out of the will. They forgot who I was and how far I'd go to make things right. And believe me, revenge was priceless. Have you ever been in a moment so surreal that you feel like you're watching it happen to someone else? That was me, sitting in a stuffy mahogany-paneled lawyer's office, surrounded by my siblings Matthew and Claire, and the stale scent of coffee that had been left too long on a warmer. It was supposed to be a formal, respectful reading of my parents' will. I was still raw from losing them both. Dad 6 weeks ago, Mom only 2 weeks later. My grief was still a fog, heavy and constant, making it hard to think about anything beyond the next hour. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. I braced myself for the emotional weight of hearing my parents' final words, maybe even a sentimental note. Instead, his tone was flat, detached, as he began listing off assets. The house, the savings accounts, the shares in Dad's business, all of it divided equally between Matthew and Claire. And me? My name was never spoken. The air felt heavier with every second. I stared at Mr. Harris, waiting for him to flip the page, to read the part where my name finally came up. But he closed the folder and folded his hands. That concludes the reading of the will. I felt the blood drain from my face. My chair creaked as I leaned forward, trying to find my voice. That's all? Matthew, sitting to my right, put a hand on my shoulder, an almost patronizing gesture. It's what Mom and Dad wanted, Anna. You understand, right? My stomach twisted. No, I didn't understand at all. And in that moment, as the lawyer's assistant came in to collect the papers, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't walking away quietly. To understand the depth of that betrayal, you need to know what my family was like. On the surface, we looked close. Dad was the stoic provider, not overly affectionate, but dependable. Mom was warm, chatty, the kind of woman who'd bake cookies for the neighbors just because. Matthew was the responsible eldest son, the one Dad trusted with anything business-related. Claire, the youngest, was everyone's darling, bubbly, pretty, a little spoiled. And me? I was the dependable middle child, the one who remembered birthdays, picked people up from the airport, and sat with them in the ER. When Mom got sick 3 years ago, I didn't hesitate. I left my apartment, my friends, my steady job in the city, and moved back into the family home. It wasn't glamorous. My days started at 5 a.m. to get Dad's medications ready, make breakfast, and check Mom's blood pressure. I cooked, cleaned, kept up with their bills, and handled endless insurance paperwork. Matthew would breeze in once a month with flowers, take a selfie with Mom for social media, and leave within an hour. Claire? She'd show up for dinner when she needed a break from her roommate or wanted laundry done. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't doing it for recognition. I was doing it because they were my parents. But there were moments when I noticed how easily my siblings' names came up in Mom and Dad's praise, while mine rarely did. Mom would say, "Matthew is such a rock," or "Claire really lights up the room." Me? I was reliable. At the time, I shrugged it off. But looking back, maybe the writing was on the wall all along. The first cracks in the illusion appeared quietly. I'd walk into a room and the conversation would stop. Or Dad would say, "We'll talk about it later." when I asked about a family meeting I hadn't been told about. One evening, Claire was on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't notice I was standing just outside the doorway until she said, "Once it's settled, we can finally fix up the place." When she saw me, she smiled too brightly and said, "Just talking to a friend about my apartment." Then, one rainy afternoon, I came into the kitchen and saw a folder sitting on the counter. The logo on the front was from Mr. Harris's law firm, the same lawyer we'd all just sat with weeks later. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe part of me already knew. Inside was a draft of the will. My name wasn't there. Not for the house, not for the accounts, not even for small keepsakes. When I asked Mom about it later, she laughed. A high, tight laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, that's just a draft, honey. Don't worry about it." But her hand shook as she put the kettle on, and I felt that uneasy weight in my chest. I wanted to believe her, but something told me I shouldn't. By the time the day of the will reading arrived, I was still raw from grief. We'd buried Mom less than 2 weeks earlier. My apartment was still a mess of unopened condolence cards, half-empty takeout containers, and laundry I couldn't bring myself to fold. Walking into Mr. Harris's office felt like stepping into a cold, sterile bubble. The blinds were half drawn, casting long shadows across the conference table. A glass of water sat untouched in front of me, condensation pooling at the base. Matthew was already there, flipping through his phone. Claire was next to him, legs crossed, scrolling through Instagram like she was waiting for a hair appointment. Neither looked at me. When Mr. Harris began, I sat up straighter, bracing myself for some kind of acknowledgement, maybe a sentimental item or a small share. Instead, it was like I'd been erased. The house at 112 Parkview Lane, to be divided equally between Matthew Turner and Claire Turner, the savings accounts at First National Bank, to be divided equally between Matthew Turner and Claire Turner, the business shares of Turner and Company, to be divided equally between Matthew Turner and Claire Turner. And then, silence. My ears rang. Surely there was a mistake. But when Mr. Harris closed the folder and folded his hands, it hit me. This was intentional. "Is that all?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "That's all, Anna," Mr. Harris said quietly, his eyes sliding away. Matthew leaned over, patting my shoulder like he was soothing a child. "It's what Mom and Dad wanted, sis. You understand, right?" Number I didn't understand. Not at all. And I wasn't going to just sit there and nod. The days after the reading felt like a blur. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Matthew's smug expression, Claire's carefully neutral face, and Mr. Harris's avoidance. I kept going over the past 3 years, the ones I'd sacrificed, the vacations I'd canceled to take Dad to the hospital, the dinner dates I'd skipped to stay with Mom during her bad nights, the times I'd sat in the hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m., sipping burnt coffee while Matthew and Claire were nowhere to be found. Hadn't that meant anything? Then, one afternoon at the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Ellis, our old neighbor. She was holding a basket of apples, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. She squeezed my arm when she saw me. "Anna, I was so sorry to hear about your parents. I also wanted to say I didn't agree with what they decided." I frowned. "What they decided?" She glanced around, lowering her voice. "Your parents told me they changed the will after Matthew mentioned you were irresponsible with money. I told them it wasn't true, but..." I froze. Irresponsible? I was the one who kept their bills paid, balanced the checkbook, made sure utilities never got cut off. This wasn't about their wishes. This was about Matthew and Claire planting a narrative. That night, I sat at the old desk in the study. Mom's laptop was still there, tucked neatly under a crocheted cover she'd made herself. I hesitated. It felt like crossing a line. But then I remembered the will, the false story, the way my siblings had looked right through me. I started with her email, dozens of messages from doctors, friends, and charities. But then I found a folder titled Legal. Inside were drafts of documents, scanned letters, and one email that made my chest tighten. It was from Matthew to Mr. Harris, dated 6 months before Dad died. Per our discussion, remove Anna from the will entirely. Claire and I will handle her moving expenses after the estate is settled. Moving expenses. Like I was a tenant they were evicting. I kept digging. Bank statements showed transfers from the business account into one labeled Matthew Personal. Notes from Claire about upcoming renovations for the family home, months before either of my parents had passed. They hadn't just erased me. They'd planned their takeover while I was still making my parents' meals and sitting at their bedsides. That night, I sat in the dark living room, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Grief had kept me frozen before, but now it was something else entirely. Cold, sharp, and steady. I wasn't going to beg for what was mine. I was going to take it back. People think revenge happens in one grand gesture, but the truth? It's a series of small, deliberate moves, each one designed to take something back, piece by piece, until the other side is left with nothing but regret. Matthew and Claire thought they had all the power now. They were wrong, because while they'd been busy counting their inheritance, they'd forgotten one small detail. I was the one who had been running Dad's business for the last 3 years. Every contract, every client, every password. I knew them all. Dad's company, Turner & Company, might have been Matthew's by name, but in reality, without me, it was a ticking time bomb. So here's what I did. Step 1. I quietly registered a new consulting firm under my name, T Solutions. I kept it small and unassuming on paper so it wouldn't catch their attention. Step 2. I reached out to Dad's top clients, the ones that kept the company afloat. I reminded them that I'd been their point of contact for years. I told them I was starting fresh, offering better terms and service. Step 3. I targeted the suppliers next, the ones Matthew never bothered to treat well. With a few strategic discounts and personal favors, I locked in exclusive contracts for my new company. And while all this was happening, I stayed quiet. No gloating, no clues. Because I knew the first real sign of trouble would send them scrambling, and I wanted to watch it happen. It took less than 6 weeks for the cracks to show. The first time Matthew called, his voice was tight. "Have you heard anything from Wilkins Manufacturing? They're threatening to pull their contract." I lied without missing a beat. "That's strange. Maybe you should check with Claire. She's been talking about renovations for months. Maybe they think the business isn't stable." 2 weeks later, Turner & Company lost its largest account. Then another. By the third loss, Matthew stopped calling altogether, probably too embarrassed to admit the empire he thought he'd inherited was crumbling. Meanwhile, my company was thriving. Every client that left Turner & Company came straight to me. I didn't have to sell myself. They already trusted me. Then came the final stroke. I'd been tracking the mortgage on the family home. Matthew and Claire had refinanced it after the will reading to pull cash for their big plans. What they didn't know was that the mortgage was transferable. I bought it. Quietly. And when the letter arrived stating that payments were now to be made to me, I waited. It didn't take long. Claire showed up first, practically shaking with fury. "You can't do this, Anna!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "It's our home!" I leaned against the doorframe, calm as ever. "No, Claire, it's the home, and you're paying me to live in it." Matthew was more controlled, but his face was pale. "This is low, even for you." I smiled, letting the moment sink in. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you 6 months ago." 6 months later, Turner and Company was barely operating. Matthew had sold his luxury car to cover debts. Claire had moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town. Me? I was running a thriving business, working with the same clients who used to keep Turner and Company alive, and I owned the mortgage on the house they'd once looked at as their victory prize. One late afternoon, I stopped by to inspect a plumbing repair, part of my rights as the mortgage holder. Matthew opened the door, looking thinner, his voice subdued. "I never thought you'd actually—" he started, then trailed off. I met his gaze steadily. "You never thought I'd stand up for myself. That was your mistake." I walked away without looking back, the sound of my heels on the porch echoing like a punctuation mark. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about rewriting the story they'd tried to write for me. They had underestimated me for the last time. If you've ever been underestimated by the people closest to you, you know exactly how satisfying it is to stand your ground and take back what's yours. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. This is Flame and Fate Chronicles, where every betrayal meets its reckoning.